When this war began, the first impression was simple. The United States and Israel looked dominant. They struck first, they struck deep, and they struck hard. Iranian military sites were hit across the country, senior leaders were removed, and the coalition showed it could reach into Iran again and again, with far greater precision than Tehran could match. On a conventional military map, that looks like control. But control of the battlefield is not the same thing as control of the war, because wars are not won by damage alone. They are won when force produces a political outcome. And nearly 3 weeks into this conflict, that outcome is still unclear. U.S. intelligence officials told Congress on March 18th that Iran's regime appears to be intact but largely degraded. That single phrase may be the most accurate summary of the war so far. Iran is weaker, but it is still there. That distinction matters because this war now has 2 scoreboards. The first scoreboard is military. On that one, the coalition is ahead. Iran has lost senior figures, taken major strikes, and seen large parts of its strategic infrastructure damaged. Even Washington's own public posture is that Iranian strategic power has been sharply reduced. If all you care about is who can hit harder, who can fly farther, and who can destroy more targets, then the answer seems obvious. But the second scoreboard is political. And on that one, the war looks far murkier. Iran has not collapsed. Mojtaba Khamenei emerged as the new supreme leader after the opening phase of the war, and public reporting suggests the real center of gravity inside Iran may be shifting even more decisively toward the Revolutionary Guards. In other words, the war may not be softening the regime. It may be hardening it. That is one of the central paradoxes of modern war. Removing leaders does not always produce moderation. Sometimes it removes the people most capable of compromise and leaves behind the people most committed to escalation. If that is what is happening in Iran, then a campaign designed to reduce the threat could end up producing a smaller, angrier, more militarized state that is still intact enough to keep fighting. And that is why the question, who is winning, is more complicated than it sounds. Because Iran does not need to defeat the United States and Israel in a conventional sense to shape the outcome of this war. It does not need air superiority. It does not need naval parity. It only needs to prove that the coalition cannot achieve a clean, affordable, politically sustainable victory. That is a much lower bar, and it is the bar Iran appears to be targeting. The center of that strategy is not Tehran. It is the Strait of Hormuz. Hormuz is not just a narrow waterway on a map. According to the International Energy Agency, about 20 million barrels per day of crude oil and oil products moved through the strait in 2025, around 25% of the world's seaborne oil trade. About 80% of that flow was headed to Asia. And the gas side matters too. About 93% of Qatar's LNG exports and 96% of the UAE's LNG exports pass through Hormuz, representing about 19% of global LNG trade. So when Hormuz is disrupted, this is not just a Middle East problem. It becomes an Asia problem, a Europe problem, and a global inflation problem. Right now, that disruption is severe. The IEA said on March 11th that the war, which began on February 28, 2026, had pushed crude and product export volumes through Hormuz to less than 10% of pre-conflict levels. In response, IEA member countries agreed to make 400 million barrels of emergency oil stocks available to the market, the largest coordinated release in the agency's history. Governments do not do that unless they believe the shock is real, immediate, and systemically dangerous. That changes the meaning of the war. At that point, the war is no longer just about missile strikes, radar systems, or military bases. It becomes about tanker insurance, LNG deliveries, aviation fuel, refinery runs, food prices, and political tolerance in countries far from the battlefield. This is how a state that is losing tactically can still create strategic pain, not by matching firepower, but by making continuation unbearably expensive. And there are signs that this is exactly the direction the war is moving. Public reporting this week says Israel struck Iran's South Pars gas field, while Iran retaliated against energy-linked targets in the Gulf. Maritime security reporting also shows the Gulf shipping environment has become highly unstable, with UK MTO logging 20 incident reports in and around the Arabian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Gulf of Oman, including 16 attack reports in the period it summarized. That means the economic battlefield is no longer theoretical. It is already active. This is where the coalition's battlefield advantage runs into its strategic limit. Yes, the United States and Israel can continue to strike Iranian assets, but as long as Iran retains enough capacity to threaten shipping, energy infrastructure, or regional spillover, it can keep imposing costs without ever winning in the traditional sense. And unless Washington and Tel Aviv have a clearly shared political endpoint, each additional week of success on the battlefield could still leave them with a war that remains open-ended in practice. That problem becomes even more serious in democracies, where wars are fought not only with weapons, but with public consent. A March 13th to 15th Ipsos poll found that 58% of Americans disapproved of U.S. strikes against Iran, while 38% approved. 78% opposed sending U.S. ground troops. 65% expected gas prices to be worse a year from now because of the conflict, and 53% said they expected the war to hurt their own personal finances. Those are not the numbers of a society preparing for a long war of uncertain purpose. They are the numbers of a public already asking what this is costing them. And diplomacy, at least for now, is not providing much relief. Turkey's foreign minister said there is no serious initiative right now to resume negotiations between the United States and Iran, though he added that Iran appears open to back-channel diplomacy. That means the war is currently stuck in one of the most dangerous positions possible. Too violent for normal diplomacy, but too unresolved to end on its own. The alliance picture is not especially reassuring either. AP reported that Canada said it was not consulted on the opening strikes and would not join offensive action. Another AP analysis said key U.S. allies, including major European partners, have resisted Trump's pressure to help secure Hormuz directly. That does not mean the coalition is collapsing, but it does mean battlefield operations are not automatically converting into a broad, unified political coalition. And wars become harder to sustain when allies support the objective in theory, but do not want to own the cost in practice. Meanwhile, the humanitarian spillover is getting worse. In Lebanon, AP reported that more than 800,000 people were displaced in just 10 days, with aid groups warning of a severe humanitarian crisis. That number alone tells you this is no longer a contained Iran campaign. It is becoming a regional systems crisis, one that is military, economic, and humanitarian at the same time. So where does that leave the war right now? If you measure by conventional military performance, the United States and Israel are ahead. If you measure by whether Iran has been politically broken, the answer is no. If you measure by whether the coalition has found a stable, affordable, internationally supported endgame, that answer is also unclear. And if you measure by the effect on the world economy, then the most honest answer may be that everyone is already paying for this war. There are now 3 broad ways this war could evolve. The first is coercive escalation. The coalition keeps intensifying strikes in the hope that enough punishment will finally force either internal fracture or real strategic capitulation from Tehran. The risk is obvious. The harder the pressure gets, the more the war expands into energy infrastructure, regional proxies, and global shipping. The second is long attrition. Iran remains too weak to win openly, but too intact to collapse, while the coalition remains too strong to lose militarily, but too politically constrained to turn battlefield dominance into final victory. That is the most plausible path right now, and it is also the most dangerous, because wars of attrition tend to shift from military logic to economic exhaustion and political erosion. The third is back-channel de-escalation. Not a real peace process, not a public summit, but a quiet negotiation through intermediaries like Turkey or others that gives both sides a way to claim partial success and step back without openly admitting failure. At the moment, that door seems narrow, but it is one of the few doors still visible. So maybe the real answer is this: the coalition is winning the fight, Iran is surviving the war, and the world economy is absorbing the bill. And that is why this conflict is so dangerous. Not because one side is obviously winning, but because both sides still have enough reason to continue, and not enough reason yet to stop. So the question may no longer be, who is winning the Iran war? The real question may be, who can endure its consequences longer?